Dr. Allen. Thank you, University of Georgia. Thank you, Wilson Center. Quick context on me, because I don't want you to hear from me at all. I want you to hear from this fantastic panel. But just to set us up for a little bit of success today, my name is Matt Stevens. I'm the VP of Strategic Impact here at Creature Comforts, which in a sentence, we are always asking the question, as is the rest of our panel, how do we position organizations to give back to the communities that support us? And so that's what I get to do with my day job. But long before I was at Creature Comforts, I was an Athenian, and a bit of a weird one, in that I kept moving away and I kept moving back. I have been a child here, I've been an undergrad here, I've been a grad student here, I've been a grad student again here. That degree I actually finished. And in 2009, I came back and took a wonderful position in higher ed administration at the University of Georgia. And then after a number of years in that, here I am in craft beer. And so an evening or an afternoon like today is really this fantastic collision between my career in higher education and my new career in craft beer. And so I'm just so honored to be moderating this fantastic panel. And then let me just share one other takeaway about this fantastic industry, the craft beer industry, that again will just kind of set the table a bit. So in craft beer, like in many industries, there are coalitions and associations that are member-driven that allow people within the same industry to come together and compare notes and do best practices and culminate often at large conferences. Craft beer is no different. In this industry, our association is called the Brewers Association, or the BA. You're going to hear plenty about that today. The first time, about 2 years ago, that I had the great opportunity to go to CBC, here was my biggest takeaway. Within this one industry is this incredible interdisciplinary group of folks. There were sessions and thinkers and workshops and demonstrations on everything from marketing and government affairs and agriculture and engineering and microbiology and sustainability. It really was, in many ways, this fantastic mini university. And so with all that being said, I cannot think of a better partner and sponsor tonight with the Wilson Center, and that if you don't know enough about them, there's plenty of literature around you to learn more, but they are deeply interdisciplinary in their focus, and so we're just thrilled to all come together and have a cool conversation. So with all that said, thank you to you for making time to come out. Thank you to the University of Georgia, to the Wilson Center, and to the Office of Sustainability for co-sponsoring this conversation. And thank you to our panelists. And so I turn to y'all. Before we jump into some deeper content, can we just do quick down the line? Who are you? What is your title? How long have you been doing what you're doing?
My name is Chris Herron. I'm the CEO at Creature Comforts, and I've been here since we opened in 2014. And I've been in the beverage alcohol industry since 2002, originally starting. So been doing this for a little while.
Everybody, my name is Adam Beecham. I'm the brewmaster at Creature Comforts. Again, been there since the start. I'm a UGA alumnus, so go Dogs. I studied genetics and ecology while I was here. And then did a short stint in grad school before I sort of bailed and went to pursue being a brewer. I've been a brewer for about 14 years professionally now, and still love it.
My name is Rob Todd. I kind of stumbled into the beer business. I didn't know what I wanted to do after graduating college, and after a couple of years ended up with a job washing kegs at a brewery in Vermont. Completely fell in love with the industry. Which it was really in its infancy then, and went over to Portland, Maine, started Allagash in the summer of '94, and we started selling beer in the summer of '95. So we will be having our 25th anniversary this summer.
Yeah. I'm Jason Perkins, the brewmaster at Allagash. I just had my 21st Allagash birthday earlier this week. Or I guess it was end of last week. So I've been there for 21 years, so not from the very beginning, but for many years and many years of growth. Worked at 2 other small breweries before that, and was a psych major in college, which makes a lot of sense, right? But home brewer before that, so been in the beer industry for, I guess, about 23 years now, I guess now.
Good afternoon. Ooh. I am not in the beer industry. That's the thing that I'm an outlier on. My name is Grace Bagwell-Adams, and I'm an assistant professor in the College of Public Health and Health Policy and Management. And I've actually been in Athens for 13 years and did all of my graduate work here before taking a faculty position in the College of Public Health. I'm also the principal investigator of the Athens Wellbeing Project, which is our work to create a longitudinal data set of Athens households to ultimately improve well-being in Clark County. And so that's the work that I'm really passionate about, is thinking about how we can use policy and data to improve outcomes for communities.
Awesome. So we're going to be kind of crossing through 3 different themes today. One is going to be really the story of craft beer in America. I would assume names like Allagash and Creature Comforts probably brought out some beer lovers today. The second theme is going to be really how do you leverage and position a company to be this force for good. Allagash is extremely famous for the ways that they do that, and we're going to talk about that. And then really just the role of community partnerships and good data to do that well is what we'll also be talking about. So here we go. Let's start really at the beginning-ish. Beer is obviously a very old beverage, but let's talk about craft beer in America. Anyone really on the panel? Craft beer seemingly came out of nowhere as this alternative to big beer. There's 7,500 and growing craft breweries in America. When did that start? How did that start? What were the contributing factors to really the rise of American craft beer, would y'all say?
Yeah. I mean, beer in general, like a lot of, we've been talking about this a lot lately at the brewery. Beer, like a lot of things in our lives, like textiles, the plant that you guys are in, we used to be a textile plant. Textiles, light manufacturing, agriculture, beer, kind of everything in our lives, really kind of after World War II, was stripped out of communities and industrialized and centralized, and in a lot of cases, even just pulled completely out of the country. Overseas, and beer was no exception. Beer 100 years ago was made in every community, just like textiles were in light manufacturing. And by the mid-'80s, there was beer that was being made maybe in 50 communities in the entire country. So it had been completely stripped out of communities. And not only was it stripped out of communities, it was really commoditized. It all looked the same. It tasted the same. There was no way really to distinguish one beer from the other. And really, U.S. beer was the laughingstock of the world because globally, a lot of brewing traditions had been maintained. But by the late 70s, people saw the opportunity to reintroduce some of these styles into the U.S., which had been so commoditized. So these little breweries started popping up in the U.S. And in the mid-'80s, like I said, there were around 50 breweries. By the time Allagash started in the mid-'90s, there were maybe 250 or 300 breweries in the country. So it started to pick up steam into the mid-'90s, and in the mid-'90s, the craft beer was maybe a 1% market share. And from the mid-'90s to maybe the mid-2000s, 2005, we went from about 300 or 400 breweries to about 2,000 breweries. But the last 10 years, the growth has been explosive, and we've gone from about 2,000 breweries to 8,000 breweries. And beer is this really cool phenomenon in that it really has been re-delivered to pretty much every community in the country. And along with that delivery, it's brought value on all kinds of fronts. Us little brewers are super inefficient, so it takes a lot of labor to make beer. So we're employing like hundreds of thousands of people. There's tons of innovation. There's urban renewal, like you guys are doing with the South Mill project. That's happening all over the country. And these breweries have created these amazing gathering places where, when you go to a brewery, you don't see people with their head glued to their phone, not socializing. I mean, people have their phones in their pocket. They're talking about things that are going on in the community. So anyway, it's been a really cool phenomenon, and hopefully we'll see it, and I'm sure we'll talk about this with other things like agriculture and manufacturing, just re-delivery of value to community.
I could add just a little perspective of mine, just talking to my father-in-law about when he started becoming aware of what craft beer was, and I think there was an affluent generation that coming out of the 50s and 60s that was able to travel to Europe, like, primarily. And so, like, a lot of people, it seemed to me, like, became aware of beer styles that were not just industrial lager. So, you know, there's a lot, I think American craft beer took a lot from the English tradition, particularly early on, pale ales, brown ales, things like that, that were sort of based, you know, done, you know, normally and then Americanized over time. So that sort of set the stage a little bit, people becoming aware that there were other beers in the world. And then, you know, there are also a few just like really brazen, crazy people that decided to take a plunge where it probably didn't make a whole lot of sense. You know, Sierra Nevada being one of the very early ones, New Albion, Anchor as well, just sort of really kind of cut the path for a lot of us and made people, you know, breweries like Allagash and Creature Comforts possible, whereas nobody would even know what we were doing without some of that stuff. So, you know, to track it, since I've been a fan since like the early 2000s, it's like Rob was saying, it's just exploded in this way where there was some cultural awareness, but now it's like if you don't know what IPA is, like, you know, what are you doing? So it's been really fun to be a part of, and it's just rewarding in so many cool ways that we'll get to talk about.
Georgia, for that matter, has been way behind the curve. So Georgia's craft beer scene is, there's been some breweries who have been around for a while, but we're like a legacy brewer now at almost 6 years old. So when we opened, there were less than 20 brewers in the state of Georgia, and now we're cresting 100. That was largely driven by the fact that we had the worst laws in the country to allow, you couldn't sell anything direct to consumers, created some really significant barriers to entry, and so that's changed. And we were, you know, the second brewery really to come here, and now we've got 2 more opening in the coming year, and so we'll be at 6 breweries in Athens, and I wouldn't be surprised to see and I hope quite a few more come as well. So, yeah, Georgia is actually even at the tail end of this in terms of, you know, finding this growth and this opportunity, which is really cool.
Rob, what made you jump into craft beer, you know, 25 years ago? What was missing in the market? What niche were you trying to move into? Tell us that story.
I didn't look at it so much as filling a niche. I got interested in the business. Like I said, I'd gone to school in Vermont, spent a couple of years in Colorado, went back to Vermont. Literally the day I got there, I called a buddy of mine and just said, you know, hey, Ian, I need a job. I'll do anything, construction, restaurants, whatever. And he said, well, my boss just said today we need a part-time keg washer. So I was thinking, I could maybe get free beer and get paid. So, you know, I showed up, started washing kegs that day, but I literally, the thing that fascinated me about the business, I love working with my hands, I like mechanical stuff, and just all the pumps and pipes and hoses and electrical stuff. I was just fascinated by it. And I was also fascinated by the beer styles that I, you know, quickly tried, even my first day on the job, and I'd never had some of these beers. I had really mostly been exposed to kind of the industrialized beers. So I got fascinated with it. And like I said, at the time, there were maybe 200 or 300 breweries in the country. When I decided I wanted to do a brewery, it was really important to me to do something different. There were already a lot of great breweries making beers in the British tradition, German tradition. Some really cool Northwest pale ales were becoming available nationally. And I didn't really see the utility in spending probably a year building the brewery and hopefully my lifetime making beer, only to make something people could already get. And I looked at the Belgian brewing tradition as an opportunity to give people a very unique experience with beer. So I didn't look at it so much as a niche or a business opportunity. I just felt like I'd kind of be wasting my time making something people could already get. So that's how we got into the Belgian brewing tradition.
I mean, anything to tag into that? I mean, it's like really same question. Years after Allagash started, you know, Creature Comforts became a thing. What, were you trying to fill a niche? I mean, obviously there was this crest and there's opportunity, but why did you break off from a very safe career? Same with you, Chris, and kind of diverge and come here.
Yeah, I mean, I think craft beer was modernizing in 2014 into the state that we see it today. There was a period of time when I started to where there wasn't a ton of innovation coming down the line. There was like the extreme beer phase where it was just like everybody was trying to figure out how bitter you could make a beer, how strong a beer could be, and you know that's kind of boring. But people were starting to drink different IPAs, which was pretty exciting for me, drinking some Hill Farmstead that was coming out closer to where these guys are from. Some IPAs that were really more fruit-driven and not as bitter, and starting to think about, if this is going to become something for a wider audience. And, David Stein and I, who's in the audience here, we started thinking that could be a thing that Georgia does not have at all yet. And so it sort of predates the hazy IPA craze a little bit, but people were looking at IPA through a little bit of a different lens. And so we thought that could be something that we could be sort of first to, and that we hoped we could do really well. But we also were sort of recognizing that craft beer was developing a really nice range of all kinds of different flavors. So, people were actually starting to look to craft breweries for lager, which was relatively new. I think people had been doing it, but not in the way that we saw, starting to develop over the next little bit. So, I thought there was room for a brewery that had a really balanced portfolio and something for everybody, something that was like best in class style of everything that we could feasibly do. So I'd say that was really the inspiration and the way that we thought we could make a different mark. And just, really, really, really caring about quality. There's not a ton of beer production in Georgia at the time, and, varying degrees of quality, care was taken towards the beer back then, but, I come from a scientific background, and so that's really what it takes to make a quality beer, is just really paying attention very closely and correcting, and just sort of, like really, really being present as you're developing something or as you're just producing something. So yeah, I thought we'd be different in that way, and I think it's something we've stuck to, hopefully. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, good.
Cool. I'm going to read y'all a quote. This is really for you, Jason, Adam, as well. But we would love to really hear from the two brewmasters, really a bit of your methodology and approach. But let me read the quote first. It's from Randy Mosher, if you're unfamiliar with him. He's an educator, he's a lecturer, he's a wonderful author. He wrote really a keystone book in our industry called Tasting Beer, which is not the best title in the world in terms of, it sounds very utilitarian for what is really a very poetic read. But he writes this in his book, Tasting Beer. In wine, the hand of God is foremost, really referring to, soil variations and weather and pattern and that sort of thing. Climate really creates the wine. So in wine, the hand of God is foremost, but in beer, the hand of man is what is clearly visible. Unlike the vintner, the brewer is actually constructing a recipe to yield a product to suit his or her vision. And every beer requires choice upon choice, each of which you can taste in the glass if you understand the process. Beer may be humble, he concludes, but it is not simple. So, Jason and Adam are two brewmasters. What led you to brewing science? And really, is brewing, is it science? Is it art? Where do those two things go together? Would you just walk us through creating a beer, or really taking it from grain to glass to a certain extent, if you could summarize that?
Sure, I could try. No, it's really a great quote. We all often talk about how, making beer is a very process-driven, thing. Not that raw materials, ingredients are incredibly important, of course, and we pay a lot of attention to that, and sourcing, quality from the source as well is super important. But what I think Randy Mosher is trying to get at there is, it doesn't end there. There's so many tools that a brewer has throughout the process to create a beer. Another example I like to say is, people always, you guys probably hear it too, like, who wrote the recipe for this beer? Or what's the recipe for this beer? And it's, what usually is being asked is who decided how many pounds of hops and, which particular grains are in this beer? And certainly that's important, but, there's so much more to the process than that. What makes a beer in the end is all the various steps throughout brewing and fermentation and packaging and so on. And so I guess to get at is it art and science, it really is both, and it's one of the things that's always made me love making beer. Constantly learning, even learning from my colleagues at other breweries, constantly. It's just a forever learning process, and there's always something more you can do. So, what is more important? I guess art or science, I would say they're equally valuable in terms of what they bring to the process. To create a new beer, you have to start with, your mind almost starts with the artistic side. What's a flavor profile you're looking for? What's the experience you're trying to give the brewer? But how you get to that end result is science and process, and there's a lot of different ways you can get to various end flavor profiles.
Yeah. It's kind of like playing a musical instrument. Like, maybe melody comes into your head, you get some kind of inspiration, something that you want to create, but unless you've spent the 10,000 hours to learn how to play the guitar, it's not really going to sound very good unless you sort of have the rest of it down. But that is the best beers, I think, do start as like an inspiration of something. It's a target that you sort of dream up in your head, and maybe you don't exactly know how you're going to get there, but then you go on this really fun journey of trying to figure out, well, what kind of ingredients should I even use, or what kind of process or temperature should I do this step at, or this and that. So it's two separate things for sure, but the bridge to connect them is part of the brewer's job, how to get from A to B, and that's what keeps it fascinating for me. Trying to dream up what's next, it's really, really difficult to think what is, if I had discovered hazy IPA in 2014 or 15 or whatever, it would be, I don't know, things would have been crazy. But it's, what's the next one? Who knows? So that's why I think you really do have to keep space. As you get bigger, we're both, medium-sized American craft breweries. It's pretty easy to kind of slip away from doing innovation, real innovation, taking risks and making beers that might not be very popular from time to time. There's a ton of breweries now that have two kinds of beer that they make, and that's what they do. And it's fine, they're making money, and they're happy, and they love the beer, but I think one of the really special things about American craft beer has been our ability to continue to push the envelope and develop new and exciting things and keep it entertaining for everybody who's paying attention.
Yeah, I'll just
Go ahead.
just add one more thing. We have a program at the brewery that's a really wonderful program and a cornerstone of our innovation that I think demonstrates a little bit the artistic and science side a little bit. We have what we call our pilot program. So at the brewery, every single employee is strongly encouraged to submit an idea, a concept to this pilot program, and we intentionally make the barriers to entry really low, if you will. So it's simply just a Google form that they can fill out with very little information, just a concept, an idea, and it's designed that way because we have plenty of experienced brewers on our staff who could submit a more fully fleshed out recipe, but we also have a lot of employees who maybe don't know beer process as well, so they'll just literally submit an idea, and it could be as simple as and I'll call out Jeff because he's hiding back there, but Jeff's our marketing director, and a couple years ago he submitted an idea that was basically my wife makes this wonderful dessert for my birthday every year. Can we make a beer that tastes like that? That was literally it. So that, and Jeff, no offense, Jeff doesn't know how to make those flavors come to reality, but it's submitted to the pilot team, and then the experienced brewers on that team work with Jeff and say, what do you mean? What are the flavors that you love about this? And in the end, we made a beer called Ganache that I think came pretty darn close to hitting what he was looking for. So kind of the convergence of this kind of concept, artistic kind of feeling that then gets executed through science and process.
Yeah, I was going to say, just as somebody sitting on the outside and watching this process, it is amazing to see where the inspiration comes from. See Blake here, and it could be a donut that you're eating literally somewhere, and you come back to the brewery with, I got this idea. I had this donut, and it was passion fruit and chocolate, and now we're going to make a beer with that, and we did that, and and it was wonderful, and it is just, I can see Adam just eat a pork rind and be like, you know what, I had an idea come up, and all about pork rinds. So it is amazing, and as someone on the outside, kind of to what Jason was talking about, it's neat to be able to bring an idea, and it'd be like sitting down with an artist and being like, I have this picture in my head, I can't possibly paint it, but I think it'd be really cool. And you get to sit down with these wonderful artists who can actually then bring that to life. And so it is a really, really rewarding thing. And to be able to be around talented people like this who can both take that vision and construct, they can gather it and see the art, but then do the science behind it to understand how flavor is created is a really magical thing to see. And yeah, the inspiration comes from all over.
Let's turn the corner from what to why a little bit. Both of these companies have a deep commitment to using the business as a force for good. Just a couple examples. Allagash, y'all have this commitment to use 1 million pounds of locally grown wheat in your beers. You just became the B Corporation. We'll talk about all that in a second. Here at Creature, we have just spent really years refining our community impact strategy. So my question is really for Rob and Chris. Did you found, Adam as well, did you found these companies with this vision of positioning yourself in that way? Did you discover it along the way? How was it step 0? Was it step 2? Where did that fall within creating a company and really starting to leverage it this way?
So for me, doing good or at least being a positive contributor to the community was always important. But I honestly didn't think Allagash would ever amount to much. I started alone, and my business plan called for pretty much when I retired to maybe have 6 or 7 employees. So I never, and this year we'll give about $360,000 or so back to the local community. I never in my wildest dreams thought we'd be able to contribute like that. I never thought we'd have 150 communities, a lot of them volunteer, or 150 employees, a lot of whom volunteer in the community. I never thought we'd be able to make enough beer to make a commitment to be using 1 million pounds of locally grown and processed grains. So beyond just being a positive contributor to the community, I didn't have a whole lot of those plans. And for the first 10 years, we just the industry was much different back then. Really, craft beer was undiscovered. It was a very small market share. No one came out to the brewery to visit us. We struggled to sell beer. We really didn't make any money. We were just kind of living hand to mouth, day to day. And so we weren't really, aside from operating in a relatively sustainable way, we weren't able to give much back because we didn't have anything to give. But once we did kind of turn a corner and we had the ability to give, it was really important to me to give back to the community. So since then, we've been giving 1% of our revenues, and like I said, that this year will be about $360,000 to the community. So not part of the original plan, but it is something that's really, really important to me. We're not volume driven at all, but by doing a fair amount of volume, we sold about 100,000 barrels of beer in 2019. It's enabled us to do much more good. So we do hope to be able to continue to grow, and hopefully through that growth, we'll be able to do more good.
Yeah, I think, the whole crew, so Adam and David and Blake and Katie, who were around when Creature started, community, the idea of community and that the community should be better because we're here was absolutely a part of it. It was one of our sort of 6 pillars of when we founded it. What I would say, though, is that it has been through this community and the challenge from the community, which in a positive way, I think a lot of the time, to say, okay, you guys can be better at this. You can do this, from a world of incredible employees who have come forward and said, hey, I know we say we want to be about this, but I think we can do it better this way. I think we're missing an opportunity here. The impact and the level of community that we do now is far beyond what at least I would have expected when I thought of what being good in your community was about. I would have never guessed we'd have an entire team dedicated to nothing but how do we impact our people in our community. And so I think, yes, we had a heart for the idea that, hey, we should do something worthwhile. I was coming out of big corporate America, and others were coming from places where maybe that wasn't a part of where they worked, and so we wanted that to be a case. But I can definitely say that what we do now is driven probably more so, in my mind, by the community and by the people who came on afterwards, as far as encouraging us to be to be a better business and to be more thoughtful about what we're doing.
Chris, I'm going to pull you into the conversation, unless you want to talk about beer as well. We'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But no, the private sector is increasingly playing a role in social innovation, which is a wonderful thing. We believe that the private sector does in fact have a role to play in the solutions of tomorrow, and we put a lot of weight behind that. What links do you see between the two, between corporate philanthropy and needs assessment? What examples locally, globally, how do you kind of connect the dots between businesses or any organization that wants to give back and being able to do it well? What have you seen in your research and in your work here in the Wellbeing Project?
I mean, I think nationally, internationally even, especially in public health, the term that we all need to be focused on is cross-sector alignment, which is to say the public sector, the private sector, the nonprofit sector, we're most effective when we work together and when we align businesses and the government and nonprofits who maybe have not historically collaborated do break down those silos and those walls, and they come together at the same table and have discussions about the community that they inhabit and the community that they serve and the community they work with to figure out how to solve its most pressing problems. I think that's really the future. That's where we have to go. I've been really grateful to observe, especially locally. I believe that that's definitely where we are. The Athens Wellbeing Project, for example, we have the hospitals, the school district, our community foundation, which is the champion of the project, the local government, and of course, Creature Comforts, many other nonprofits who are not just using the data, but speaking into what are the gaps in the information that exist in the community. What do we not know about our community? And unless we have cross-sector alignment, which is to say this kind of sort of reaching out across the table, shaking hands and keeping that going, I don't think that we can do the work as well as we could, right? And so that's the thing I've been really heartened to see, and certainly in the research and literature, in public health and public policy, that's really what we're talking about is cross-sector alignment, is breaking those walls down, working together, thinking really innovatively about who our partners should be and being more inclusive in that. Because ultimately, in our attempts to have good data and to use that data and put it to work, the most important thing is that those data are representative of the community that you're trying to understand.
Yeah, will you drill down just real quick, a little deeper? What is the Athens Wellbeing Project? How's it funded? How does data collection go about? How's that data used?
We could be here a long time.
Yeah.
But, I'll give you the elevator pitch, the short version. So Athens Wellbeing Project really is just an attempt to have meaningful data that will inform the work that we're doing as a community to improve health and well-being. That's really it. What that means in practice is that we've been in the process of collecting data, longitudinal data sets of a representative set of households in Athens-Clarke County to complement other existing data. We've a long time had tons of data sources that we use, all our organizations, internally and externally. The census, for example, we're always using census data. But AWP was really created to fill in the gap and to help answer the questions that we didn't really have answers to. And I'll have to tell you that, 4 or 5 years in, what I've learned, and what I think our team has learned, is that a lot of what we're learning is really more specifically what questions to ask rather than what the answers are. I know that sounds really vague, but we're always learning through the data that we collect more about what we don't know. And a really good example of that, in the last iteration of the data we collected, it became really clear that for working families, one of the biggest barriers to getting to work and staying at work and thriving is childcare, and the cost of childcare and accessing that childcare and the flexibility of that childcare and the quality of that childcare. And so, what AWP allows us to do, I think, is take an iterative approach, constantly asking questions, asking those questions of a representative set of households, and including, I think, the households that have systematically, prior to this, been left out, right? Because a lot of the philanthropic efforts that y'all are engaging in is to really help those who need it the most. And the interesting thing about data collection efforts in every community is that the people who are the most vulnerable are often the voices that you don't hear from. And so AWP also is an effort to close that gap, to really hold up data and say, these data are meaningful because these data are inclusive of some of the most vulnerable citizens and some of the groups that have systematically been excluded.
How would people here learn more about the project?
Well, we have a website, and we're on Instagram and Facebook and all those things. But yeah, please go to the website and check it out. Definitely, if you're local, you can just email me. But yeah, it's an ongoing thing, and we're in our 5th year. We're not competing with the census this year, but we'll be back out in the field in 2021. But yeah, I would say that the data are being used. And an example is with the Get Comfortable campaign, Athens Wellbeing Project is a presence on the Get Comfortable campaign's advisory committee. And that's because what Creature Comforts and Get Comfortable is interested in is really thinking critically about what the data say our needs are. And so we're building relationships and collaborations, I think, to help inform that critical work.
Yes, we like to say we try to be as dispassionate as the data. We really want to understand what is the story the data tells us and how we mobilize dollars to where they mean the most in that. Jumping back real quick, 1 million pounds of Maine-grown grain. How did y'all land on that number? When did y'all land on that number? How are you doing in that process? In case you didn't know that, this is just a major focus of yours over the last couple of years. So how did that come about? How's it going?
Yeah, you take this one.
You can chime in. Yeah, so yeah, in 2017, we kind of made a commitment, first internally, and then we're vocal externally about moving forward with using 1 million pounds of Maine-grown and Maine-processed grain. So processed either means being malted or at least dried, for example, if it's a raw grain. 1 million pounds of those grains per year by 2021. So the backstory there is, first of all, we, for years, have been making an effort to use ingredients from the local community. Initially it started with stuff like fruit. Fruit was probably the first thing that we really started using, quite a long time ago. We're fortunate to have great fruits like cherries and raspberries and blueberries, strawberries, et cetera, that we could access. But in terms of traditional brewing ingredients, malted barley, hops, especially those the two big ones, of course, malted wheat as well, there really wasn't a lot available. Maine does have a long tradition of small grains growth, but there wasn't a lot of processing, malting facilities, or in any, until relatively recently. Once those two opened and there was a little bit more of a movement towards brewing quality grains, we kind of came right on our radar, and we started using it on the small scale. And really, the more we interacted with farmers, the more we talked to them, the more we realized the opportunity that was there for them. Maine's a big potato state. We grow a lot of potatoes in Maine. Not as many as Idaho, but I think we're number 2 after that. And there's a big tradition in northern Maine with growing potatoes. But that had really been, one, dropping off. There was less and less of it every year. And also, potatoes are a crop that really strips the land, so they have to rotate other crops through the plots of land that they grow potatoes on. So there was just a lot of opportunity, fields that just weren't being used, farmers who were willing to grow more grains, but there wasn't an outlet for it. So, we started to try to use more. And I think in 2017, we were using less than 100,000 pounds in a year. And really, it came, luckily from Rob. I am thankful all the time at the opportunity to work for a company that not only, one, has no outside ownership other than Rob, but also that ownership like Rob, who's willing to put a stake in the ground and commit, really his company to doing something. And it really was Rob's call in the end to say, let's make a statement, let's make a commitment to do this. Excuse me. And we did talk about, could we do a percentage of our grain? So maybe we say, okay, we're going to use 10% of our grains that we use in a given year from the local community. And that seemed like a good way to do it, maybe the safer way to do it, because then if we didn't grow, we still wouldn't have to necessarily grow our use. But in the end, we decided that, one, it was bolder for us to say a number. So no matter what happens with our growth as a company, we're still going to grow our use of local grains, was one part of it. And secondly, it's a way to communicate to our farmer and maltster partners to let them grow their business. These guys are small farms, small malting companies, and really if we had immediately said we're going to use 1 million pounds in 2018, they probably couldn't have supplied it. So it's kind of a twofold approach where we could grow into it with our use, and then they could grow their farms as well. And it's been just a wonderful experience. It's one of my favorite things I get to do is to interact with these farmers and see them. We go to see them at least once a year, and every year you see more fields that they're planting, and they're so proud to show these fields that they have more grain growing in. Their malt houses are growing. They're investing. And in one case, it's a family of fourth generation farming family where the malting aspect of their farm is run by 4 brothers who are in their late 20s and early 30s, who are just getting revitalizing this community that had lost a lot. So it's just been an awesome experience, and and we're not the only ones, of course. There's lots of other breweries in the state who are expanding their use of local grains, and we kind of feel like as the largest brewery in Maine that we can help be a voice to kind of encourage people. Like, look at what we're doing, you should do the same kind of thing, and I think a lot of people have followed that lead.
Yeah, I mean, if you'd asked me even 10 years ago, which isn't that long ago, if we could even use 10,000 pounds of locally grown grains, I would have said that's impossible. It's never going to happen. It's crazy. And here we are in 2019. I think we used over 600,000 pounds. But like Jason said, it's important for us to make these commitments and work with the farmers in the community, because it's a lot of infrastructure that they have to commit to malt the grain, to package the grain. So we really work closely with them over a multi-year horizon so they can ramp up their facilities. And it's pretty cool because, I mean, with the Buck family that you were just mentioning, the Buck boys, they're doing most of our malted barley. They're growing the malt quality barley and they're malting it right at their farm. We were talking to them about unmalted white wheat, which we use, and they were kind of like, we can grow that. We can take a stab at that. And didn't they grow like 18 acres of white wheat for us, which they hadn't done before? Yep. So it's pretty cool to see this happening in the state, and I'm pretty confident that by 2021 we'll be buying 1 million pounds of Maine grown and processed grain. We just had a dinner at the brewery with a bunch of the farmers, and after a couple beers, I said, well, why not make it 2 million pounds? So, I don't know, maybe I ended up
taking notes.
Yeah, maybe we ended up making another commitment, so.
Chris, can you tell the group, why is Allagash here? There is something very, very unique within the craft beer industry in terms of this collaborative spirit. The example I always give is that Adidas and Nike don't co-create a shoe. That would be super rad if they did, but they don't do that. But here's Allagash, technically competitors in the craft beer space, and yet they're here in town. So really, can you just talk about the unique collaborative spirit of craft beer and why it works, but then specifically, why is Allagash in town for the next couple days?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. There are very few industries. Toilet paper companies never get together and perfect a recipe. It just doesn't happen. We're stuck with mediocre toilet paper sometimes and good toilet paper other times. They could all just improve the industry. With beer, that's what happens. Everybody gets together with craft beer. And the idea is that, in part, I think it's because we do sort of share a common competitor. I think a lot of us look at each other as working together to try to improve the landscape of beer broadly, and that we think craft beer, for all of the reasons we've talked about, is a better option for people, for the consumer. We can create a better experience than the large macro breweries can, and we can have a much more meaningful impact in our communities and in people's lives than they can, and that's from somebody who worked there for a long time. So I think we have that shared sort of common competitor, which allows us to think a little bit differently, and to recognize that even as an industry that's grown as much as we have, we're maybe 20% of the industry. So there's still 80% of the volume to go after. We don't have to go after each other's. We can work together to try to just sharpen the knife and get better and improve process, improve ways of working. Leverage not just the brewing side of it, but strategies in sales, strategies in how you impact communities. And so, they're here because of, one, when we've been working on our Get Comfortable, this idea of doing a collaboration. If you're not familiar with Get Comfortable, it is a fund that we have that gives money back to the local nonprofit community here, and that we are one of 50 businesses within Athens that now pours money into this fund. And so it's a wonderful thing, and one of the ways that we contribute to it is through a Get Comfortable beer that we make, and all the profits are donated. And we thought, how cool would it be if we were able to sort of, one, let people use this as a platform to raise awareness for Get Comfortable, and one way to do that would be to brew with incredible brewers who the world respects and is aware of, but that also we could use that as an opportunity to shine the light on those brewers and say, we're 5 years old and we think we're doing some great stuff, but here's where our inspiration comes from. Here are other people's. We're not that unique. This is something unique about our industry, but not necessarily purely about our brewery. And so and that helps raise further awareness about why people should drink craft beer instead of macro beer, because we think it generally makes a difference. And so, we looked around, and over the last 2 years, Russian River was our partner last year, another phenomenal brewery who does incredible things within their community. And we were, as excited as ever to say, who else could we ask? And we're like, we're definitely the 8th grade kid at a dance, trying to be like, so do you guys maybe want to brew a beer together? And thankfully, because of, I think because of the work that Get Comfortable has done, and because of the type of beer that these guys have been making since the beginning of it, and the type of company that we're hoping and trying to build, they were kind enough to accept, and it's been just, we went up there 2 years ago before this just simply to go learn from them. We spent time traveling around the country just to say, you all are so incredible, and they were so generous and opened their doors to us for a full 24 hours, and we just picked their brains about everything we could. And so, that's why we were so excited to be able to have someone like that here, and I think it is what makes the industry unique, is we really want to do something and make most of the people who are getting into craft beer are getting into it, not sort of, to go back to a question earlier, not to fill a niche in the market, but to do something different than what they were doing, to come be a part of something. So I think the industry is attracting those types of people who are really wanting to do something different and be a part of something that we think has meaning and that is doing something awesome. And so, exciting.
Yeah, like Chris said, it's very unique how collaborative this industry is. And for us, we've had a great time. We were able to spend the day today at the South Mill facility, and I get inspired when I can hang out with a crew like this. Your guys' facility was like I was saying, was very, very impressive. I'm loving drinking the beers. Unfortunately, we can't get these beers up in Maine, so it's fun to come down here and drink them. But it's inspiring for me. It gets my gears turning to come spend the day with you guys. And just last week, our business partner, our bank, was in our brewery, and we were showing them around, and I was showing them our lab program. We have 7 full-time people in our lab, and they noticed that there was another brewery's beer. There was a 4-pack of another brewery's beer. There was only 3 of the cans there, and they're like, oh, why is this beer in your lab? And I said, well, we're happy if any of the other breweries in our community have an issue that they can't figure out. We're happy to help them as best as we can. And so probably a week doesn't pass where we don't have a brewery in our community. And these are, competitors. Probably some of them are taking our draft lines. Maybe we're taking some of their draft lines. But we're happy if they have an issue. They'll bring a 4-pack of beer in. We'll do our best. We have a pretty sophisticated lab to help them through whatever the issue is that they're facing. And I was telling the bank this, and they were looking at me, and they were saying, what other industry does that? Like, helps their competitors. So it is a pretty unique, special thing, and it's amazing that it was like that when I started back in '95 when there were 200 or 300 brewers. It's still like that now when there are with 8,000 breweries, and hopefully this will continue to be how things are going forward. It sure doesn't seem like it's going away. There's just the collaborative, communal spirit.
Yeah, I'll just, to back up a second, throw a little love fest back at you guys here. I just think it's, I think my first experience with you guys was actually the beer, right? Which is obviously a very important part, to especially brewmaster. But, I just had your beer and instantly, I had several of your beers and thought they were all really good quality. And so I think it was 3 or 4 years ago we came out here for the first time, and you guys showed us around. And I think one thing I just wanted to make sure to note for this crowd, especially you guys who probably know this already as Creature, as your brewery here in town, but we have just been super impressed with you guys and your team. Your beer, that's what started it, but once I get to know you guys and see the way you guys operate, it's really impressive. And I think it's worth especially noting while we're talking about, giving back to the community and philanthropy, for a brewery that, you guys call yourself the old guard in Georgia, but we still look at you as a young brewery compared to us. But for you guys to be as organized and as put together on the philanthropy front as you are at your size and age is absolutely remarkable. To put another way, these guys make wonderful beer in a community that's demanding and asking for their beer.
you could easily not do it, easily, and just throw that money down to the bottom line and efforts down to the bottom line. So I think it's just, I've been really impressed with you guys from day one with your commitment, your team, to this. Again, not something you have to do by any means. You could easily be a successful brewery in this town without it. So,
Thank you.
Thank you. I have so many more questions. I'm going to hit one more area. I want to hear from Allagash. I want to hear from Grace, and then we're going to turn it to y'all. Last year was a huge year for Allagash. There was a James Beard Award in there. You became B Corporation certified. People have probably heard about James Beard, but if you have questions, please ask. But let's talk about B Corp real quick. How did y'all land on that B Corp certification? What is a B Corporation? What did you learn as you kind of inched your way towards certification last year? That's a huge milestone, so tell us a bit about that.
So the B Corp thing, it's a little complicated, but a simple way to look at it, it's like a third-party certification, almost like a LEED certification on a building where a third party comes in and says, you know, you've built this building responsibly. And the B Corp symbol says, when you're making decisions at your company, you know, not only are you considering the shareholders, which is what most companies consider when they're making decisions, you know, profit for the shareholders, return for the shareholders, return on investment. B Corp certifies that you are considering the community, the environment, and your employees when you're making decisions. And really, as far as why we got certified, is those things really align with what inspires me. I mean, it's great we crossed the 100,000 barrel threshold this year. I'm not even sure what day it was, and that's cool, and I guess it does deserve cheers, even though we didn't really do cheers for it. But I'm just not that inspired by the volume or revenue, or even awards for the beer. You know, the thing that inspires me about awards is that it I guess says that we're focusing on quality, and the quality is really, really important to me. But the things that inspire me are, like with our philanthropy program, one of the components of our philanthropy program, we established a pediatric nurse scholarship fund for Maine Medical Center. And this year, for that fund alone, we raised about $25,000 for local pediatric nurses to continue their education. Like, it really is like inspiring and emotional for me to be able to hand that $25,000, you know, check over to them. Or if so that would be an example of consideration for the community. Or we actually just got an award that, and most people would kind of look at this and shrug, but the department that treats sewer in the town of Portland awarded us the pre-treatment award for the year. And I was like, that actually is really, really cool. I mean, again, it almost means more to me than, say, a gold medal in a beer contest, because it's just a nice recognition that we're considering the environment when we're making decisions at the brewery. So, you know, I thought that was really cool. Probably most businesses, when the sewer department shows up, you know, they're pissed at them, or they'll change their practices if the sewer department's monitoring what they're putting down the drain. Luckily, you know, we really value our relationship with them. Or when an employee comes in my office and says, you know what, we had a really tough time a couple months ago, but this company I felt like took care of me during that period, and I really appreciate that. You know, those are the things that really like inspire and motivate me, and those are kind of all the things that B Corp certifies. So for me, it was a no-brainer. You know, interestingly enough, I thought, I mean, all these things, again, they've been things that have been really important and inspiring to us. I thought we'd skate through to an easy certification and get a score that easily slid us in. We just kind of barely qualified for it. So there's a lot more work. It kind of excites me that we barely qualified, because it just shows me how much potential we have to continue improving and doing more good.
And if you're unfamiliar with B Corporations, very easy to Google. I've heard it referred to as the Hippocratic Oath for the private sector, which I kind of love. And you've heard of them before. It's Dannon, it's Ben & Jerry's, it's Patagonia, it's many others. So some good stewards of your dollars. Grace, there's a lot of future leaders and students and local leaders already here in the room. If you could give them one piece of advice, one recommendation of how to put good data to use to make a bigger impact through whatever their organization is, where would you tell them to start that? Because there's a lot of data, there's a lot of noise. How do you take that first step to, again, position your organization to give back in a meaningful way?
I think that's such a good question. Well, first of all, if you're local, I think that if you really look around at the incredible wealth of knowledge and expertise that the university has, and also, more importantly, the willingness of many faculty members and students to engage, I think, in really meaningful work with community organizations, that is a resource that is certainly being used, but I think that there's just infinite potential for those kinds of collaborations. And so, you know, when you look around, and you just really have to look at your community, if it's here, if it's somewhere else. We're very fortunate to have the university here, but you just have to look around and say, where's the social capital, right? Where's the expertise? Where is the work that's going on right now that's really meaningful, and how can I engage in work that's already going on to be value added rather than going off and kind of starting my new thing? You know, one of the things I see a lot with my students is they'll get really excited about a cause, and I've talked to many, many students over the years who want to start their nonprofit on X, Y, or Z, and my advice is always to, if you want to do that, that's fine, but do your homework first. And if you can plug in with existing efforts first, that's always better. It's more effective, right? So I would just say that, I think, you know, just really leveraging the resources and the partnerships. And where there are no partnerships, start them, right? I think the most effective work that we do is when we're building bridges to one another, from resource to resource or from resource to need. And so just really focusing on that collaboration and partnership is really critical.
Absolutely. What questions do the many wonderful people who came out to give us your time tonight, what questions do you have? Dr. Allen and Dave have a microphone, I believe. I see it. Raise your hand if you have a question, or feel free to shout if you just want to shout. Who has the first question?
Hey, I work at Creature Comforts. I'm the brand development manager. I'd love to hear from both companies how y'all determine how you distribute your funds to the community.
I mean, like I said, we didn't really get into this with a plan, and it's kind of, it's continually evolving. But we have, I guess, a number of kind of crews that allocate the funds, and some of it is just historic. Early on, when we first started to have funds available to actually give back to the community, we developed a couple of relationships. One of them, like I said, with Maine Medical Center. One of them with a local theater group that provides like affordable arts and theater for the community. So a few of them are historic. We've just been working with them for years, and I feel like they've almost built our giving them philanthropic funds into their budget, and you know, we continue to love working with them. We also have a really cool chunk carved out where we have a philanthropy team where employees rotate through. So you're on the team for a number of years, and then you rotate off and bring some new people on. And they're in charge of allocating $50,000 twice a year. So they basically get kind of grant applications from anyone who wants to send an application into Allagash, and they'll allocate $50,000 the first half of the year and $50,000 the second half of the year. So it's you know, it's constantly evolving, but that's kind of how it works, if that answers your question. So yeah, it's kind of a mix of me, some historical relationships we've had, and a kind of a team at the brewery that rotates and makes decisions. So really a lot of people are involved.
Yeah, so we started out in year one very much with sort of cause-based giving. So sort of whatever came in, we just sort of all got together and said, do we think this works? Do we think this is something we want to give to? And quite frankly, it was a very time-consuming process. There's a lot of requests, and at the end of the day, there's usually somebody within the organization who feels passionate about it. That's the way causes are. And so, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. We just we wanted to take a sort of different approach and try to get, sort of take the same business lens that we put to the rest of our business in terms of strategic planning and put it to the impact side of what we were doing. And so the way we've gone about doing that and the way that our programs are structured now, there's really 3 programs. There's Get Comfortable, Get Artistic, and then Brew for One. And Get Comfortable and Get Artistic really operate very much the same way, which is that we have an advisory committee who we kind of go to, and at least this is the framework that, particularly for Get Comfortable, Get Artistic, is moving this direction. We say, hey, what are the most pressing needs? And so people like Dr. Bagwell will sit on that and provide us with, here are the most pressing needs within our community. And that was really a big thing for us, is this move from what we called sort of cause-based giving to community-based. And that allowed us to sort of, to steal Matt's term, sort of disconnect and from the sort of the heart of it and just be as dispassionate as the numbers and say, look, what we're here to do is try to improve the community. And so what are the most pressing needs? We ask experts, what are the most pressing needs in the community? They say, these are them. Then we go out and we do an RFP process to the nonprofits and say, based on these needs that the experts are telling us are the most important things for our city right now, please provide your grant proposals. They send in proposals. We take those back to the experts and say, okay, experts, what are the organizations doing the most pressing work against the most pressing needs? And they say, we would sort of recommend this, and it's a group of 7 different folks who are much more talented and skilled in understanding this. We would say, we certainly don't have any idea what the solutions are or even always what the problems are, but we're pretty good at shining flashlights and building brands and creating awareness. And so we sort of leverage that skill we have, and we rely on the experts to tell us where that money should go. And so that's sort of how Get Artistic and Get Comfortable work. And then Brew for One, we're still working through, but that's essentially the idea that, we still want to be able to support some of these wonderful causes, and so it's this idea that we want to do for one what we wish we could do for everyone. And so annually we pick one cause, and that has currently just sort of been through staff. We've been fortunate things have just kind of bubbled up the right way, and we've been able to just sort of say, hey, for this cause for this year, we are going to brew a beer, and we're going to give all the proceeds from that to this particular individual, which we wish we could do all the time for everyone, but it just doesn't work that way. So we're, fortunately in year 1, we kind of had this idea we wanted to give. We didn't know how, but we started out with this sort of strategic plan because it was a little just chaotic for us, I think, on like, oh, there's a percentage night for this organization. There's the, which ones do we do? And, I don't think we had a strong idea of exactly what our cause was, and so we all felt real passionate about Athens, though.
And I'll say this as well. I think part of the reason right out the gate there was this influx of requests is because there's a bit of a reputation built by folks like Allagash within the craft beer industry that when a craft brewery comes to town, like it's about to get good. They are, in addition to quality and spaces and great experiences, they're going to be for your community. And because of that reputation, right out the gate, there was a pile of requests. And so creating a system was important. What other questions are out there?
Hi, my name's Amanda. I also work for Creature Comforts. I'm on the commercial sales team. So a big part of my job and my role in Get Comfortable is engaging our retail partners to raise those funds that we then channel into the organization. So I've been really fortunate. I've been able to go to Allagash and meet your employees and hear about some of the great philanthropic things that you guys are doing up there, see the programs in action, and talk to your employees about their volunteer work. But what I'm curious about is, you guys obviously have a huge footprint, and I'm wondering how, or if you engage with your retail partners to, bolster your philanthropic engagement, or, how you encourage, whether it's just local Portland area or larger, to engage.
Yes, we do, and you got to be a little bit careful in this industry as a supplier working with retailers. There are technically, without getting into a lot of details, there are a lot of laws that prevent us giving anything of value to retailers and vice versa. So we have to be careful with some of these relationships. But one of the things we're trying to look at more, like I said, this last year we gave about $360,000 back to the community. we're looking at ways we can kind of lever those funds. Instead of just writing a $360,000 check, how do we make that like 2 or 3 times more impactful? Like instead of just writing a check to protect the watershed for Lake Sebago, which is where we get our water, maybe we can do an event at the brewery and not only write the check, but also let the water district kind of do a display at the brewery and introduce maybe the 1,500 people that come visit the brewery, and maybe 50, a couple hundred of those people get involved. So we're looking at ways to lever it. And we have done some initiatives with retailers. We're doing one with Luke's Lobster now, where for every pint of beer, what are they donating the dollar for now with Luke's? Jeff, you're more familiar with that program, right?
So that particular partnership, so Luke's Lobster is actually a nationwide chain of seafood restaurants, obviously focused on lobsters, and they're sort of split headquarters between Maine and New York, and have very similar vision and focus, and they're also a B Corp, and so we talked to them, and we saw there was an opportunity. They actually have a donor-advised fund called the Keeper Fund, which is all about promoting sustainability of seafood harvesting, so that means both the environment and also the people. We jointly worked with them to donate $1 from the sale of every purchase of Allagash White in their restaurants, half from us and half from them, up to a certain amount every year. So it goes to that fund. So that's one of the first programs we've done. We've also worked with our top local grocery chain on building out a program with them to support food banks regionally, but it's definitely been an area that we've been focused on more and more as we think ahead.
And I think our whole philanthropy program, I think it's going to evolve, especially in the next couple of years. Like I said, the first 10 or so years, we were unable to give anything. And the whole thing has kind of crept up on us. And now we're looking at, wow, we're giving like close to $500,000 a year. Hopefully we're on the horizon of giving a pretty substantial amount back. So I think we're going to be stepping back and looking at the whole program and evaluating and making sure it is like very, very thoughtful and as impactful as possible. So I think we'll be doing more programs with retailers like that program with Luke's Lobster going forward.
I think we have time for one more question. Who else has got one? I see. All right. Awesome.
This is a local impact. We've heard from our friends in Maine the impact on local farmers. But for us here at Preacher, I know we do the local farmers market, but is there any kind of goal or percentage or whatever that y'all could share as well? Yeah, we've sort of started the idea of using locally grown ingredients through our mixed fermentation, our small batch program that's mostly available at the brewery. There is some grain production in Georgia, but malting barley is not a crop that's grown here. It's a pretty niche product, actually. It's only grown in a few places in meaningful amounts within the United States. So, we do a small amount of grain from a farm called Dayspring here, and we've made a small commitment, nothing like these guys, to use their raw wheat. They don't have a malting facility, which is a barrier for us to using larger quantities. But a lot of these small batch, like the bottles that you see for sale at the brewery, are made, almost all of those, using Dayspring wheat. These local guys, you can actually buy their flour at the farmer's market, which is really, really good stuff. But it tends to be a lot of the fruits, herbs, honey, things like that we can get our hands on here locally. Whenever possible, basically, we're using that for the smaller batch beers. In an effort to certainly support those people that we've developed relationships having the farmer's market in the parking lot for all these years, but also to give our beers a thumbprint of Georgia. There's a lot of people making these types of beers, and we have indigenous terroir or character, or just the types of things that are grown here are uniquely Georgia when you look at them, in totality. So it makes for an interesting story for a beer. We try to make a beer that's engaging, not just for the flavor, but for the sort of reason for it being a beer. And So, certainly those ingredients lend intrigue into a beer. And, moving forward, I think making more and more fruit commitments is something that we've started to do. Letting farmers know the year before that we're going to require 1,000 pounds of strawberries is a huge sort of added amount of security for them going into a year. They know they can plant that plot and that it's pre-sold, and that if it doesn't look beautiful, if it's not like farmer's market quality, it doesn't matter to us if it's bruised, if it's brown, the flavor's great, it's fine. So a lot of times we will be taking fruit that otherwise doesn't look beautiful, but it tastes beautiful. So that's another sort of piece of leverage we can use for those type of things. So we haven't drawn any lines in the sand. I think it would be fun in the coming years to say we're going to do. I think we could probably soon commit to 4,000 or 5,000 pounds of locally grown fruit. Would be something. You didn't hear it from me. Oh, more. Blake says more. We did more than that. All right. Cool.
10,000 pounds. 20,000 pounds.
Yeah. We'll figure out a number. We're going to take a cue from these guys.
Everyone, can we thank this panel?